There's a moment in every long-running tech rivalry where the competition stops being about features and starts being about philosophy. Not specs, not benchmarks, not which OS boots faster on a cold morning, but about what kind of future is being built and who gets to control it. Linux just crossed that moment. Quietly, steadily, without a flashy keynote or billion-dollar marketing campaign, Linux crossed a line that Windows simply cannot follow anymore. Not because Microsoft lacks engineers or money, but because crossing that line would require abandoning the very business model Windows now depends on. For decades, Windows and Linux were competing on the same battlefield. Desktop usability, application availability, gaming performance, hardware support, ease of installation. Windows usually won on convenience and ecosystem. Linux won on flexibility and freedom, but paid for it with rough edges. That balance is gone now. The modern Linux desktop is no longer just good enough. It's confidently stepping into territory that Windows cannot enter without breaking itself in half. The line Linux crossed isn't just technical, it's ideological. And once you cross it, there's no going back. Linux crossed the line of user sovereignty. On modern Linux systems, the operating system once again belongs to the person sitting in front of the screen. Not in theory, not buried in license agreements, but in actual practical everyday use. You decide what runs, when it runs, what data is collected, and where that data goes. There is no mandatory account login just to install the OS. No silent background services reporting usage. No AI assistant embedded so deeply into the shell that disabling it becomes a cat-and-mouse game with updates. On Windows, ownership has shifted. The OS increasingly behaves like a service platform, not a tool. You are not the primary stakeholder anymore. Telemetry isn't optional in any meaningful sense. Core features are gated behind online accounts. System updates can install new behaviors without explicit consent. Ads appear in system menus. AI features arrive whether you ask for them or not. This isn't accidental. This is the logical outcome of Windows being repositioned as a data-integrated, AI-driven, subscription-adjacent ecosystem. Linux simply refused to go there. What makes this a line Windows can't follow is that reversing course would collapse Microsoft's strategy. Linux distributions don't need your data to survive. They don't need engagement metrics to justify existence. They don't need to upsell you into cloud subscriptions. Most are funded by community effort, enterprise support contracts, or foundations with a mandate to protect user freedom. Windows is funded by integration into Microsoft accounts, Microsoft services, Microsoft AI, and Microsoft's data pipeline. Linux crossed the line where the operating system stops being a surveillance-friendly platform and becomes a boundary again. Another line Linux crossed is modular identity. On Linux today, the OS is no longer a single monolithic thing you accept wholesale. It's a composition. Immutable base systems like Fedora Silverblue, OpenSUSE Eon, Vanilla OS, and NixOS allow you to separate the core system from user applications entirely. Your OS becomes something stable and almost untouchable, while apps live in containers, flatpaks, or reproducible environments. This changes everything. Breakage becomes rare. Updates stop being stressful. Rollbacks become trivial. You can experiment without fear. You can freeze your system in time if you want. You can clone your entire setup across machines with terrifying precision. This is not power user tinkering anymore. This is becoming mainstream Linux behavior. Windows cannot truly adopt this model without rewriting itself from the ground up. Windows applications still assume deep system access. Legacy compatibility forces Microsoft to keep decades of architectural decisions alive. Registry entanglement, shared DLLs, and global system state make immutability nearly impossible. Microsoft can layer virtualization and containers on top, but that's not the same thing as designing the OS itself around immutability. Linux crossed the line of reproducibility. On Linux, entire systems can now be defined as code. Not just servers, not just containers, but full desktops. Your operating system, applications, services, and configuration can live in a version-controlled file. You can rebuild your machine exactly as it was on another computer years later without guessing which update broke what. This is not just a technical flex. It's a philosophical statement. Your computer should be predictable. Windows cannot offer this guarantee because unpredictability is baked into its update model. Updates are not just security patches. They are behavior changes, feature insertions, integrations, and experiments. Predictability is the enemy of constant engagement. Linux crossed the line of local-first computing. Modern Linux desktops are increasingly designed around the assumption that your computer works fully without the internet, not in a limited offline mode, but completely. Updates can be mirrored locally. AI tools can run on device without phoning home. Speech recognition, image generation, coding assistance, and automation can operate without accounts or telemetry. This is where the gap becomes uncomfortable. Windows' future is cloud-assisted by design. Copilot is not an accessory, it's a pillar. Features are increasingly justified by their connection to cloud intelligence. Even basic functionality is being reframed as something enhanced by remote processing. Microsoft can't walk this back because AI integration is now a core selling point to investors and enterprises. Linux doesn't have investors to satisfy in the same way. It doesn't need AI to be a funnel. It can treat AI as a tool, not a dependency. When Linux integrates AI, it does so as optional software you install, remove, modify, or replace. The system does not care if you want it. That indifference is power. Linux crossed the line where privacy isn't a feature, it's the default. On Linux, privacy isn't something you configure by disabling dozens of toggles after installation. It's something you break intentionally if you want tracking. That inversion matters. It changes who is responsible for protecting the user. Windows increasingly treats privacy as an advanced option, something that can be overridden for improvements, personalization, or security insights. Linux treats privacy as absence. Nothing happens unless you explicitly add it. This is not just about telemetry. It's about trust boundaries. Linux doesn't assume it has the right to inspect your behavior. Windows increasingly assumes it does. Linux crossed the line of community-driven evolution. Windows evolves by mandate. Decisions are made internally, tested on users, and rolled out globally. Feedback exists, but it's filtered through corporate priorities. Linux evolves by friction. If users don't like a direction, forks happen, alternatives emerge. Competing desktops, init systems, package managers, and workflows coexist. This chaos used to be Linux's weakness. Now it's its shield. When one desktop environment introduces controversial changes, users move. When one distribution becomes bloated, leaner ones rise. When a company overreaches, the community roots around it. Windows has no equivalent pressure valve. You either accept the direction or leave the platform entirely. Linux crossed the line where choice is structural, not cosmetic. On Windows, choice exists mostly at the application layer. On Linux, choice exists at every layer from the kernel scheduler to the display server to the package format to the desktop shell. That level of optionality is incompatible with a tightly integrated, monetized OS ecosystem. Linux crossed the line of hardware longevity. Linux today runs better on old hardware than Windows does on new machines. That's not hyperbole. Lightweight desktops, efficient kernels, and absence of background analytics mean Linux can breathe life into systems Windows has abandoned. Secure boot support, modern drivers, and Wayland improvements have closed the compatibility gap while keeping performance lean. Windows hardware requirements move in one direction only. TPM enforcement, CPU whitelists, and AI acceleration requirements are not about security alone. They are about aligning hardware with future platform strategies. Linux doesn't care about that alignment. It runs where it's wanted. Linux crossed the line where updates stop being scary. On Linux, especially with atomic and snapshot-based systems, updates are reversible. You update because it's safe, not because you're forced. If something breaks, you roll back and continue working. On Windows, updates are events. They interrupt, reboot, and occasionally alter system behavior in ways users didn't consent to. This difference reshapes trust. Linux crossed the line where the OS fades into the background again. Modern Linux desktops don't beg for attention. They don't notify you about features you didn't ask for. They don't surface promotions. They don't gently nudge you towards services. They exist to disappear once your work begins. Windows increasingly wants to be present. Helpful, proactive, intelligent, but always there, always suggesting, always integrating. That presence may feel convenient to some, but it also marks the OS as an active participant in your workflow, not a neutral foundation. Linux crossed the line where the operating system stops being a product. It's infrastructure again. Windows cannot cross that line without ceasing to be Windows as Microsoft needs it to be. Linux already crossed it because it never stopped being that. This doesn't mean Linux is perfect, it still has rough edges. App parity is improving but uneven. Some workflows remain easier on Windows. But perfection is no longer the metric. Alignment is. Linux is aligned with users who want control, longevity, privacy, and stability. Windows is aligned with ecosystems, services, AI integration, and data-driven iteration. These alignments are drifting apart, not converging. The most important part is that Linux didn't cross this line suddenly. It crept over it while Windows was busy chasing the next platform shift. Wayland matured. Flatpak stabilized. Kernel drivers improved. Gaming compatibility exploded through Proton. Desktop environments polished themselves quietly. Meanwhile, Windows became louder, heavier, and more opinionated. Now, standing on opposite sides of that line, the difference is obvious. Linux treats you as the owner of your machine. Windows treats you as a participant in a platform. That's the line. And once you notice it, it's very hard to unsee.